Can't tell you how much we appreciate your doing this to accommodate the commission and to have commission members here too from time to time. But we thank you. I know this is a terrible restraint on you with the time limitation, but we have no choice, and our task is heavy and our time of delivery is short, and we just had no possibility to go around the United States and hold hearings in various communities because of the cost. We have enough to operate. We have good staff representing both parties, and we meet hopefully establishing trust among ourselves, and it's a great pleasure and an honor to accept this responsibility. So with that and this truncated activity, we will go forward. The first group is the first one is the Americans for Generational Equity, and if they would come forth, and then the Concerned Youth of America, the Roosevelt Institute at American University, where I received an honorary degree, and Young Americans for Federal Debt Awareness. So those four would take a position at the witness table, please. Thank you. And Erskine? What? They're being sent over right now. Ah. Well, I would certainly hope so. Yes. No. Yes, well. We're all here because we're not all there. Oh, no, that's not right. I didn't mean that. That was a terrible thing to say, actually. Now, Erskine, did you want to add a note? Oh. Well, thank you all. I saw Muskie's picture in there. God, he was a piece of work. He was awful good to me. Oh, were you really? Well, thank you very much, and I'm sorry you were guided to another Warren within the structure here, but if you go forward with the first of the group, Americans for Generational Equity. Please. Oh, Erskine may have a comment. Please go ahead, and the time is there, and the restraint is before you. What was the first group? I'm sorry? Americans for Generational Equity, then Concerned Youth of America, the Roosevelt Institute at American University, and Young Americans for Federal Debt Awareness.
Chairman Bowles, Chairman Simpson, members of the President's Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform. My name is Yoni Gruskin, and along with Caroline Matthews and Jake Bullock, my two fellow directors in the room today, I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify. We represent Concerned Youth of America, a nonpartisan, grassroots organization that educates this country's youth about the perilous fiscal course of this country and its consequences for our generation. Our network extends to college campuses in over 20 states, representing nearly 1,400 young people. Today, we're here to speak for them, but more broadly, we're here to speak on behalf of the millennials, the generation of 80 million Americans who find their futures endangered by runaway deficits and soaring interest costs. We are here to lend a voice for the members of our ambitious, earnest, and hardworking generation who will leave school with an uncertain future and the misfortune of paying the bills for the work of previous generation of politicians and voters.
We are not here to discuss the size or the scope of government or to prescribe specific policy recommendations. Rather, it is our duty to remind you, all of the American ideal, that each generation, should inherit a better standard of living than their parents, that through the American ethos of hard work and fair play, we can dream to reach higher levels of prosperity. But as you all know by now, the scary charts and numbers that get circulated around this building and your meetings ensure that we'll be stuck paying more to receive less. Soon, 20 cents of every dollar we pay in taxes will not go towards building highways or schools, a 21st century defense structure, or investing in renewable energy sources. That money will go straight into the pockets of our creditors in the form of interest payments.
This is not fair, this is not right, and quite simply, this is not American. You all, the chosen representatives of President Obama's commission, have the ability to change our course. You all have the opportunity to restore our social compact, to renew a devotion to intergenerational equality, and to let us believe that once again, tomorrow can be better than today. It's time to think about the next generation and not the next election. Thank you.
Thanks.
And now the Concerned Youth of America, is that part of your group? You were just the two of you then, and now to the Roosevelt Institute at American University and the Young Americans for Federal Debt Awareness. Please.
Hi, my name is Aaron Goldstein. I'm the president of the Roosevelt Institute at American University. We're a chapter of the Roosevelt Institute Campus Network on behalf of the millennial generation, the largest ever to grow in America. I thank you for the opportunity to present our vision on the future of Social Security and the social safety net. The Roosevelt Campus Network is a student policy organization of 8,000 members at 86 campuses nationwide that creates change in communities across the country by implementing student-generated policy solutions. Beginning in January of this year, Roosevelt created a program called Think 2040 to empower young people to design the future that they want to inherit, all in a forum that caters to millennials' unique characteristics. Participants from across the country will determine the values that they want American policy to reflect, identify the most crucial outcomes and policy priorities, and offer recommendations for policy steps that must be included in our shared vision for the future. Despite the misconception that the millennial generation doesn't care about Social Security or the outcome of various reforms, Think 2040 conversations to date prove that young people think of Social Security as an essential aspect of the fabric of American society, woven into our culture and linked to other policy outcomes that young people desire. While noting the importance of achieving their vision for America's future in a fiscally responsible way, the millennial generation believes that Social Security and a strengthened social safety net play an important role. Millennials reject the notion that cutting programs is the only effective way to rein in the growth of our public debt. Indeed, many millennials directly feel the brunt of rising healthcare costs and find the prospect of rollbacks in Medicare and Medicaid to be truly frightening. Instead of passing these costs onto families, millennials are committed to finding a road to affordable health care in America. Similarly, millennials understand that Social Security enables their grandparents to be financially independent, which in turn allows their parents to make investments in our education, the core of their efforts to achieve the American dream. The values of community empowerment and community responsibility are crucial to understanding the millennial generation's viewpoint on the importance of Social Security. It is these are the most popular values cited by a large percentage of our groups that have engaged in Think 2040 model so far. Social Security is an example of a program that millennials consider to be a form of community expression, a shared initiative that our nation has taken on to raise up those individuals with the greatest need and to keep the community organized as a whole. Our generation lacks health care coverage, consistently ranks among the hardest hit by unemployment, and carries huge debt, with 20% of millennials owing more than $10,000. Millennials are conscious of the current economic situation that they are encountering. Community empowerment and responsibility are values that have proliferated among the millennials despite the economic hardship that we have encountered in our communities. Another key idea that the millennial generation is passionate about is a shared spirit of entrepreneurialism and a desire to innovate. As more and more young people agree that they like to work for themselves, take advantage of a mobile work life, become social entrepreneurs, or advance their field through a job in the green economy, our members noted the importance of feeling free to pursue their innovative ideas. Social Security provides the safety net necessary for young people across the country to take these risks. Young people deserve the right to pursue their American dream, but they need the promise of security to do it, and Social Security provides this freedom. In the words of Aaron Cohn, a member of the Roosevelt Institute at American University, instead of a safety net, we need a social trampoline. A trampoline that doesn't just catch people near the ground, but bounces them back up into the high-functioning roles where they're capable of succeeding with the quality of life that we all deserve. A trampoline that allows them to take risks, to pursue their entrepreneurial, innovative ideas, and take chances, the foundation of the American dream. A trampoline that ensures that not just the fortunate do well, but that our communities remain strong. One that assures Social Security is there to support us all in time of need and launch any of us that need it back into the community, growing and succeeding along with the rest of the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, the young gentleman from Young Americans for Federal Debt Awareness.
Members of the Commission, first let me say thank you for the opportunity to present today. My name is Ryan Sheneke with Young Americans for Federal Debt Awareness, and we have a website called wecan'tpaythattab.org, which is solely dedicated to educating and engaging young Americans in the federal debt. Like many people my age, we are concerned about the consequences of the debt burden being placed on us by today's policymakers. So we're encouraged to learn that the President had created this commission. However, we were very disappointed to see that the commission is primarily made up of people who will not be obligated with paying back our massive debt. As evident in 2008, politicians are more than willing to engage young Americans in grassroots movements to get themselves elected. But when it comes to engaging young Americans in actual policy decisions, the effort has been absent. We started wecan'tpaythattab.org out of frustration over politicians throwing around billions and trillions like they were nickels and dimes, and the constant lack of urgency referring to those obligated to pay for our debt as the children and grandchildren, as if they hadn't been born yet. When in fact, it is my generation, those in their 20s, who will first be burdened with the debt you were creating. This commission is the perfect arena for politicians to begin to involve those who are obligated to pay for this debt. We hope the commission will seriously consider holding another hearing focused solely on the input of young Americans. Because if we're going to have to pay this debt back, we ought to have a say in how it's done. For my generation, the American dream is seriously in jeopardy. 50 to 60% taxes, trillion-dollar-a-year interest payments, and out-of-control federal budgets are no joke. I doubt many of you would be here today if you had faced those obstacles as you started your adult life. Our opinion needs to be heard, and in fact, you need our help. Any solution you come up with is going to have to be long-term. The hardest part of your task might not be coming up with the solution, but communicating it to the American people. And it's only by working together that we can hope to put this nation on a sustainable fiscal path. The path towards fiscal sustainability is going to take leadership on both our parts. Our part will be to take our knowledge of our generation that we are a part of and effectively educate and engage them. Your part will be to take on the leadership roles you were elected to do by making the tough decisions, getting beyond the bitter partisan politics that have become commonplace, and making a decision for the good of the whole and not the individual. We look forward to the opportunity to work with you on a solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I should let you introduce yourselves, your names and the group. And if you two gentlemen would like another couple of minutes, you know, you sandwiched yours together. Each of the groups get 4 minutes each, and you split yours. So if you have anything more you wish to split on us, I mean, no, feel free to do so.
Actually, in all fairness, we're from the same group, Concerned Youth of America. My name
Okay,
is Jake
I
Bullock.
thought
I'm
there
one
were
of the
4.
directors.
Give your names so the American public will know how vital you are and your group.
I'm Yoni Gruskin. I'm the founder and executive director of Concerned Youth of America.
I am Ryan Sheneke. I'm a co-founder of Young Americans for Federal Debt Awareness.
And I'm Aaron Goldstein, the president of the Roosevelt Institute at American University.
Thank you.
Since we have time, I have a question. Mr. Sheneke,
Yeah.
you indicated that your group, Young Americans for Federal Debt Awareness, has also focused on solutions. Would you like to share a few of those ideas with us?
Well, I don't think we're not so much focused on providing the solution. We're focused on educating people about the solutions and getting young Americans engaged, because I don't think they understand what's going to happen to them and what's coming. So we really need to get out there. We're focused on thinking of creative ways to get out there and engage those people who aren't engaged, because it's really easy to get out and engage the people who are already engaged in this. And that seems to be what's happening. And if we really want action, we need to get out there and get with the people that are not involved in this.
Yeah, and I also, from the Roosevelt Institute's perspective, that's something that our main focus is on, focusing on solutions for the future, working at the community level and engaging different stakeholders through, if it's teachers or business leaders, things like that, that we want to reach out to, that we want to get their input on what our fiscal future should look like, and then obviously understand what the millennial generation wants to see like 30 years from now in our Think 2040 model that we've been simulating for the last 6 months.
And just one final thought. Our generation isn't apathetic, we're not indifferent, and we're not dumb. So if if you guys want to, I mean, we should be engaged in these conversations because they really are going to impact our futures more so than most of the members of the commission itself. And we can really, you know, if it's explained to us, we understand it. If the importance of the issues are outlined for us, then we get it.
I do hope, though, that you will accept some of the responsibility for giving us your ideas as to what the right solutions are. These are all going to be really tough choices, and you bet we've got to communicate because none of it's going to be an easy pill to swallow, but we need your input from your generation as to what you think we should recommend to the president.
Well, and that's why maybe we should consider holding another hearing focused on the youth input. I mean, this is great that you've brought us out here, but this is a small amount of time, and we're talking about a huge issue.
Well, I thank you very much. And let me just say this, so you have this in perspective. If you think that I, at this age, took this on for a bunch of old coots, I didn't. I took it on for my grandchildren. I respect the senior citizens. I am one, but our job is the future. And I'm here because of 6 grandchildren. Erskine's here because of 7. And we get shot out of the saddle a lot. As if people, you know, think we're not paying attention to youth or to the seniors. These are going to be some of the most painful decisions. Flash words are used. You're going to cut Social Security. You're going to do this. You're going to burden the senior citizens with the debt of the world and you know, do things to the lesser in society. I used the word. It meant those who were most vulnerable, didn't have some denigration aspect to it. So this thing is filled with emotion, fear, guilt, and racism. It's all in there. Various stages. Pretend it isn't. It is. So here we go. And I really appreciate your being here. Wish we could do more, but we can't. And now we'll go to the next panel. If the next panel would come on, representing the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the Cato Institute, the Center for American Progress, and the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, the CBPP. And just introduce yourselves and your group, if you would, please. Thank you.
I'm Chris Wilson with the Carnegie Endowment.
Michael Ettlinger at the Center for American Progress.
Bob Greenstein, Center on Budget and Policy Priorities.
Fine, if you proceed.
Oh, thank you very much for having these hearings, and I think the commission is a great idea, and it's obviously a crucial problem. So I'm glad we have a bipartisan commission looking into this. As you're probably going to hear a lot of today, unless today's massive deficit spending is reduced, the nation is really headed for a fiscal calamity. There's no doubt about that. Both parties are responsible. As I've calculated, the last president had the biggest annual spending increases since Lyndon Johnson in the 1960s. So this is a bipartisan problem. The Cato Institute has been tackling this issue for years. We've built a website, downsizinggovernment.org, that goes department by department and lists all kinds of needed spending cuts. There are 4 types of reform I think we should pursue. We need to restructure the big 3 entitlements. We need to terminate unneeded programs. We need to devolve activities to the state governments, and we need to privatize. I'm just going to run through a very quick laundry list of some targets that I'd like to see pursued. For Social Security, an easy reform is just to simply index initial benefits to prices and not wages. That'll slow the growth carefully and in a controlled fashion over time. For Medicaid, I think the obvious solution is a block grant. That was the solution we used for welfare reform in 1996. I think a block grant would encourage state governments to have more efficient health care systems. For Medicare, I like the Paul Ryan approach of replacing the current system, say in 10 years, with an individual voucher approach. That would allow the federal government to directly control the costs. Terminating unneeded programs, there's hundreds of examples of this really. A high priority cut is agriculture subsidies, as you've probably heard a lot before. Subsidies, they induce farmers to overproduce, they inflate land prices, environmentalists don't like them. I think they damage our international trade relations, and frankly, they're welfare for the well-to-do. I think farm subsidies are the type of program we need to terminate. We need to devolve activities, current federal activities, to state and local governments. There are currently over 800 different grants and aid programs for state and local governments. This whole granting system, as you know, basically exploded in the 1960s, and we've gone now from just in 1990, there's only 463 grant and aid programs. Today, again, there's over 800. This has got out of control. So take areas like K-12 education. I don't think federal involvement in K-12 education has improved the schools. We've spent a huge amount of money on it. And we can look at an example of a country like Canada. Canada has no federal Department of Education. There are no federal subsidies in K-12 education in Canada. It's all a local activity, and they generally get higher test scores than we do in this country. So I'd target K-12 education spending at the federal level. Privatization has been a trend that's swept the world. Countries all over the place have privatized airports and air traffic control systems and all kinds of other things which we still run and subsidize here in the United States at the federal level. So I think the Department of Transportation, frankly, you could privatize most of that department. States should look at privatizing their highways, as states like Virginia have done. Dozens of cities around the world, like London, have privatized their airports. I don't think there's any reason for federal subsidies for airports. Air traffic control, again, Britain and Canada have privatized air traffic control. Why not us? These sorts of cuts are going to strike a lot of people as rather drastic, I'm sure. I think eventually, if you look at the projections from the CBO, we're going to be forced to make these type of cuts eventually down the road. You know, if you look at the long-term projections, and you've got spending going from 20 or 25% of GDP today to 40% a few decades down the road, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. The American public is just not going to accept that level of spending. Other countries have made dramatic reforms. New Zealand abolished their farm subsidies. Canada dramatically cut its size of government. There's no reason why we can't do that sort of reform.
Thank you, and if you have further remarks, just leave those with us if you wish.
My name is Chris Wilson. I work on the staff of the Energy and Climate Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. International cooperation on the advancement of fiscally and environmentally sustainable development is a core interest of the endowment. I would like to make 5 points briefly today. First, federal transportation spending has abandoned its founding principle of pay-as-you-go and is rapidly digging a deeper deficit hole. Direct subsidies to transportation from the general fund of the U.S. Treasury currently amount to $45 billion annually. This is unsustainable. Second, deficit spending on transportation, particularly spending to cover the costs we impose on the system ourselves, but refuse to pay for out of pocket, is a tax on future generations. These expenditures, for the most part, do not represent an investment benefiting future generations, but ongoing costs of system repair and maintenance that should be paid by the people imposing these costs on the system. Third, we recommend eliminating present subsidies to carbon-based fuels, especially oil and gas, recapturing the revenues foregone, and applying these revenues to putting our transportation program back on a pay-as-you-go basis. The Obama administration has proposed to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies totaling over $40 billion over the next 10 years. This is a good place to start. Fourth, we also recommend ending royalty relief to oil and gas companies for deep water drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. This policy was originally designed to encourage drilling in the deeper areas of the Gulf at a time when the price of oil was around $18 a barrel. Now that the price of oil is around $70 a barrel and industry profits have grown substantially, deep water royalty relief is no longer necessary. Finally, the GAO has estimated the government could lose up to $53 billion in foregone royalties from deepwater oil and gas production over the next 25 years. We recommend ending all royalty waivers and using the revenues recaptured to helping our country reduce its dependence on oil, especially in the transportation sector. The United States presently imports almost 70% of the oil it consumes. Coincidentally, the transportation sector represents 70% of our oil consumption. Recouping these royalties could help put our transportation program back on a pay-as-you-go basis, reduce the amount of oil consumed by transportation, and reduce the deficit in the process. The work of this commission is important to both our nation's fiscal security and our energy security. Cutting oil and gas subsidies and pricing transportation carbon can advance both of these goals. We look forward to working with you on this important initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me. Chairman, members of the commission, I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here. Time is short, so I will mainly refer you to my written testimony and to the various works that the Center for American Progress has done on this issue. We all know that we have a long-term and a mid-term deficit problem, and certainly by 2015, assuming the economy is on track, we need to start addressing it. I'd like to start with just a couple of quick cautionary notes. One is that a key to meeting our deficit goals for 2015 and beyond is economic growth. And if we get overzealous on deficit reduction between now and 2015 and end up dumping our economy into a second dip of the recession, then anything this commission comes up with on paper in terms of revenue increases or spending cuts could easily be swamped by the effect on the budget of the economy. So while I understand now to 2015 isn't what this commission is focusing on, I don't think it can completely ignore the impacts of policies today on economic growth between now and then, because it will affect the ability to hit the goal. Second cautionary note is that future deficits are obviously a serious problem, but I think there's a risk that with a commission such as this, which has as its sole assignment deficit reduction, there's the risk of losing track of other things that are important. The cure could end up being worse than the disease. There are bad consequences to high deficits, but there are also bad consequences to underinvesting in our children, shortchanging other important national investments. So we could end up with a balanced budget, but with a country that's worse off. And I think it's very important to be careful not to do that. So I'm going to tick through 4 or 5 areas that I think are key to the commission being successful. One is government efficiency, and it's kind of pro forma to say the government should be made more efficient. I understand that, but there is, I think all of us would agree a lot to actually be gained in that area if we could do it. And particularly in an era of fiscal constraint, if we have functions we want government to carry out, to get them to be able to do that successfully, we need to do it efficiently. And one of the problems is that government efficiency lacks champions. And I think this commission could be a very important and new champion for greater government efficiency. Defense spending. We're at post-World War II high. It's projected to stay that high even after we're out of Afghanistan and Iraq. We spend about as much as the rest of the world combined on defense. We need to assess whether our national security strategies are sustainable. And to put it starkly, we either need to spend less or step up to the plate and pay for it. Revenues. Currently, we're collecting in taxes about 60% of what we're spending. We have the lowest collections as a share of our economy since 1950. The U.S. is one of the lowest taxing countries of advanced economies in the world. That doesn't mean the solution should be all taxes, but it does mean that the problem isn't that we're spending beyond our means. The problem is we're just choosing not to pay for what we're spending. So I think, revenues need to be part of the discussion. Healthcare, I know, was a big topic of discussion this morning, and we think there's actually an alternative budget you could do on the upside on healthcare that, in fact, the reforms put in place, if aggressively implemented, could produce bigger savings than what CBO is estimating. And a lot of that depends on how aggressively it's implemented and how closely we keep track of implementation and how things are working and learning and adapting over the years as implementation goes into effect. So I think that's another thing that the commission can focus the country's attention on, is the importance of implementation. So just to end quickly on an optimistic note, President Clinton, as with President Obama, inherited a grim long-term fiscal situation, and through tax increases, spending discipline, and wise economic policies, ended up running surpluses. So we can do this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At the Center on Budget, we've long argued that the federal budget's on an unsustainable course and that policymakers need to begin acting. We commend the formation of the commission and think the President's goal of stabilizing the debt as a share of GDP over the coming decade is the right goal. We would urge you to keep in mind the President's admonition against too much fiscal constraint while the economy is still weak and unemployment is high. For example, the economy badly needs now extension of unemployment insurance and state fiscal relief. Failure to do so is likely to weaken the economy, and by weakening it, delay the date on which it's safe to start instituting the very fiscal consolidation we need. This kind of brings up a question of the target date, in particular the 2015 target date. Aside from the problem that we don't know yet how fast the economy will recover and therefore exactly what year we can start phasing in the savings, as you know, it's going to be really difficult, really virtually impossible to get significant savings in the big entitlement programs, the big three, by 2015. The health care bill really does virtually everything we know how to do now to save money in Medicare. We need to learn a lot more. There are pilots and demos in the bill. We got to aggressively act on them, but it's not going to get us significant savings by 2015. And we're among those who think it is reasonable for this commission to consider Social Security, but any changes there are going to be phased in, and they're not going to yield significant savings by 2015. There are other parts of the federal budget, but once you're beyond the big three, the rest of the budget has not and is not projected to rise faster than GDP. It's not contributing to the problem. Doesn't mean all those programs shouldn't be scrutinized. They should, but the savings from the other parts of the budget, particularly by 2015, are limited. So it really means that the only reasonable way, in terms of policy, you could get to 3% of GDP by 2015 is if the majority of those savings came from revenues. That is to say, you'd need a path where in the short run, the majority of savings were revenues, and over time, the contribution from health care and to a lesser degree Social Security grew. But you have to reach agreement and hopefully come up with something that could pass Congress. And so I think my recommendation is that if such a course doesn't give you such a path by 2015, that the Commission be open to relaxing the date a bit. It would be a great accomplishment if you could stabilize the debt by 2017 or 2018. That would be a lot better than having a deadlock and coming up with nothing. A few specific items on the deficit reduction composition. Needless to say, slowing the rate of growth of health care costs is critical. As analysts across the political spectrum and people like David Walker have said, there really are real limits to what one can do in Medicare and Medicaid in the absence of slowing the rate of growth of health care costs system-wide. Otherwise, you just have real two-tier systems and all kinds of inefficiency problems. In the area of Social Security, I think the plan developed before he became OMB director by Peter Orszag and noted economist Peter Diamond is a good place to start in looking at measures for long-term Social Security solvency. In looking at Social Security, I'd urge you to keep in mind how modest Social Security benefits are. The average retiree benefit today is $1,170 a month. It's about $14,000 a year. And the percentage of pre-retirement wages that Social Security replaces is significantly lower here than in most Western countries. Obviously, revenues need to be a key part of this. And while we were huge supporters of the '86 Tax Reform Act, in today's fiscal environment, tax reform that is revenue neutral would actually set us back by taking all kinds of opportunities for deficit reduction off the table without progress. Tax reform needs to contribute to deficit reduction in and of itself. Lastly, in developing your proposals, I would strongly urge you, and I think, Mr. Bowles, you spoke about this morning, to elevate as a principle taking care to protect the most vulnerable people in the country. I'd urge you to strive to ensure that as a package, the policies you develop not push more people into poverty or make the people in poverty poorer. The last time we had a big bipartisan deficit reduction package was 1990. And in that package, as well as the '93 package, in both of those packages, They were carefully designed to look at the situation of people at the bottom of the income scale and offset other changes on them. In fact, both of those packages not only reduced deficits, they even reduced poverty at the same time. Not only didn't increase it, they reduced it. So we'd urge you to have a principle of protecting the people at the bottom, and to help you do that, I'd strongly urge you to do what the bipartisan negotiators did in 1990, which is to say that they had the congressional budget, when they had big proposals, not every little detail, but when they had big packages, they had the Congressional Budget Office do distributional analysis by income group so they could make sure they weren't doing damage to people at the bottom. Thanks very much.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate it, and it's helpful, very helpful. So with that, we move on to the next group of four, the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, the Concord Coalition, the Democratic Leadership Council, and the Economic Policy Institute, if those folks would step forward, and you can introduce yourself at the time you testify, and appreciate it very much. Thank you. Please go forward. As you
And the problem with fiscal responsibility, of course, is that it's so much less fun than fiscal irresponsibility. So the points I want to make today are a couple. The Commission needs both a medium and a long-term fiscal goal to work towards. I'll quickly present a plan that I crafted to try to achieve both, because I heard you wanted specifics. There's more details in my written testimony. I want to focus on the importance of looking at policies that are conducive to economic growth. And finally, I want to say that process reforms can be used to help both force and enforce actions. So we need to work towards two goals, both bringing the debt down to a reasonable level over the next 5 to 10 years and stabilizing it thereafter, as the IMF has said, at pre-crisis, not post-crisis levels. Both goals will be necessary to reassure credit markets, keep interest rates low, avoid sovereign debt fears from hitting our markets, and helping to keep the recovery on track. Neither is easy to achieve. So in my written testimony, the plan that I present has a couple of main components. They include, first, significant defense savings, and I think there's a lot of interest and potential for bipartisan efforts in that area of the budget. A domestic discretionary cut, then a freeze, and then limiting the growth so that it doesn't grow as fast as it has at some periods in the past. It can generate real savings in the medium term from doing that. Reforms to Social Security, which would include increasing the retirement age for Social Security and Medicare and longevity indexing, slowing the benefit growth for upper and middle income earners, using the superlative CPI, and reducing spousal benefits. For health care savings, the plan includes reducing some of the insurance subsidies in the new reform bill, increasing cost sharing and premiums for Medicare, introducing a voucher option, which I think is now more viable that we have exchanges in place, and instituting a cap on federal health spending over time to restrict growth. Finally, it recommends other savings, including eliminating farm subsidies and other such things. On the revenue side, I would broaden the tax base, specifically including elimination of health care exclusion and reducing the home mortgage interest deduction, along with many of the other reductions and consolidations in the $1 trillion a year that we spend on tax expenditures. Additionally, I would introduce a broad-based carbon tax, and if there were any additional revenues from that, you could use that to replace some of the more outdated parts of our tax code. So most of the sweeteners that we would like to have in a budget deal have been given away in the past, but I would recommend two. One, reducing corporate income tax rates, and the second is spending more money on productive investments, which have been shortchanged in our budget over time. So the principles in this plan are that we want to have a plan that's balanced, that protects the most vulnerable, and is conducive to economic growth. Pledges not to raise taxes or not to raise taxes for families making less than $250,000 per year are unrealistic, as are any promises not to touch certain entitlement programs. The bulk of the budget problem is more on the spending side is mostly on the spending side. And so I think a budget proposal should be oriented towards spending reductions, but there's absolutely no way spending cuts alone is going to fix this problem, and revenue increases will be needed. This should not be seen as an exercise in getting just the numbers to add up, but also to reflect our national values and priorities while giving special considerations to policies that will promote economic growth and enhance competitiveness. Finally, I hope you're aware of the work of the Peterson-Pugh Commission on Budget Process Reform. I believe you all have copies of our first report, Red Ink Rising. What we're focusing on now, which will come out in a second volume this fall, is looking at ways that process can help move the budget forward, particularly looking at the need for both medium and long-term targets, the use of budget triggers to help keep budget plans on track, and ways to enhance budget transparency. So 2 things in closing. The first is that the reason for making these changes is not just for fiscal austerity, but it's to put us back on a path of prosperity. And with these fiscal realities, we now have an opportunity to relook at the priorities and values in our budget to meet opportunities and the challenges coming up. The second is on a personal note, and this is for any of you who've had or have young kids who first learn about knock-knock jokes. This is how my morning starts every day. My son says, knock, knock. I say, who's there? He says, how's the? And I say, how's the who? And he says, how's the budget going? Did you fix it? Falls out of his chair laughing and proceeds to tell this joke throughout the day. So please, for the sake of my family, put an end to these knock-knock jokes. Thank you.
I want to tell you, she didn't learn any of that in my class at Harvard, where she was one of my students. Maya, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you. I'm Bob Bixby. I'm Executive Director of the Concord Coalition, which is a nonpartisan organization advocating fiscal responsibility. And I don't have any knock-knock jokes, but I think it says something about Maya that her children would be talking about, please end the budget deficit or do something about the debt this morning. And so you're personally contributing to generational responsibility. Well, I thank you for having this hearing and for your efforts. It's certainly crucial to cast a light on the long-term problem that we have, and indeed the short-term problem that we have. I'd like to make 3 points just about the way that you approach this task, and make then a couple of suggestions about things that that need to be confronted in terms of solutions. One of the things is you often hear about political realities, and you know, anything that you recommend will have to be passed, and it'll have to go through the Congress, and it will be very difficult to do so. But in coming up with the recommendations, I would urge you to not pay too much attention to political realities. And the reason that I say that is that there is nothing that I can think of that is politically realistic that will solve this problem. People look at the spending side and the tax side, and you know, I've done it, you've done it, and I mean, there's a reason why people always drop back to cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, and things that aren't going to hurt anybody. So, I've been in so many discussions where people say, but that won't fly politically, but then you've taken off everything off the table that might possibly solve the problem. So, yes, we do have to be concerned. You can't, you know, go into fantasy land, but I think one of the things that the Commission needs to do is bend the curve of political reality. We had a lot of talk last year about bending the healthcare cost curve. I think your mission should be to bend the political reality curve. Secondly, I would say on the goals, I would put more emphasis on your sustainability goals and the goal of getting back down to a primary budget balance by 2015. Not that I think that that short-term goal is unimportant. I think it is, but I would hate to see a prestigious group like this that's been put together as a special process, essentially duplicating the work of the Budget Committee. I think that Chairman Conrad came up with a perfectly acceptable budget resolution that actually gets at the achieves that goal. I think, and you know, so I would like to have this commission. I think the value of this commission is to look at the policies that will certainly get us on a better path in the short term, but that will produce long-term savings and get at that structural budget deficit that's really the thing taking us over the cliff. And finally, I would urge you to do as much as you can, and today is certainly a good step, to engage the public. Not that we're the public necessarily, but this will be televised and people will see it, and there are a lot of groups that you're hearing from. But I think it's good to get out and do some events outside of Washington if you possibly can. We've been doing this fiscal wake-up tour with Brookings and Heritage and Dave Walker for about 6 years now, and I can tell you that people really appreciate it when you have kind of a group of, an odd couple group of folks that don't necessarily agree, but are willing to present the facts and listen to all sides. So I think that there's a great opportunity for this commission to engage in that sort of public education effort as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members of the Commission, Chairman Simpson, Chairman Bowles, thank you for the opportunity to present our views and for joining in this essential and fundamentally important work. A bit of context. Our 2010 deficit at $1.5 trillion is about 10% of GDP. In historical
Could we just ask the witness to identify, give your name and...
Edward Gresser, President of the Democratic Leadership Council. Thank you. In historical context, this is higher than the largest New Deal and Reagan-era deficits, which peaked at 5.9 and 6.0% of GDP, but well below the 30% of GDP deficit that financed World War II, and also below the Civil War and World War I deficits. Earlier generations restored balance quickly if painfully after these experiences, most recently in the 1990 budget agreement and the 1993 budget bill. Our short-term policies can draw on their experiences. Like those earlier peaks, today's deficit has temporary or semi-temporary causes. The Iraq and Afghanistan wars, the 2001 and 2003 tax bills, the recession, and the spending and tax cuts part of the stimulus bill all have reduced revenue and raised spending. With some recovery, with withdrawal from Iraq, the phasing out of stimulus, and the phasing out of high-income bracket tax cuts, the deficit should fall. A few more measures can bring us near the Commission's short-term goal of zero deficit excluding interest by 2015, enforcing budget caps and pay-as-you-go rules, beginning to pay for the Iraq and Afghanistan deployments through taxes rather than emergency appropriation, concluding a WTO Doha round which reduces entitlement spending on farm programs while opening export markets for farmers. But after 2015, deficits widen again, and not because of temporary or semi-temporary policy choices, but as a consequence of facts, of interest payments, of demography, and of health costs. First, deficits over the past decade have raised our debt levels and therefore our built-in interest obligations. Second, as we add about 1.1 million people to the workforce each year, 1.5 million turn 65, and the retired population, which uses Medicare and Social Security, grows faster than the workforce. Third, medical advances and healthier lifestyles give older Americans longer life expectancies and therefore longer periods in retirement. And finally, health costs rise faster than inflation, meaning Medicare in particular rises faster than revenue. Thus, we have a structural gap. Approaching 2020, CBO sees revenues about 19% of GDP and expenses approaching 25%. This qualitatively differs from the deficits I mentioned in the past, and our earlier successes therefore offer fewer lessons. As we start, all options should be on the table: discretionary and entitlement spending, taxes and tax expenditures, budget process, and more. Let me add one more. We should finance future wars, at least in part through special taxes, to restore an ethic of nationally shared sacrifice in wartime, as well as for fiscal reasons. But policy tools like tax increases, spending cuts, and budget rules are not enough. They will slow but not stop the widening of our structural gap. As they do so, they can steadily raise tax burdens and reduce the capacity of government to provide essential services. Since this structural deficit is a consequence of facts that mean higher spending and reduced revenue, a truly successful response must change those facts. Raise the growth of the workforce through more open, high-skilled immigration, slow the growth of the retired population through higher retirement ages, at least for physically undemanding jobs, cut the cost of public services by reinventing government at all levels, and raise the growth capacity of the economy through simplifying our tax system and broadening its base, eliminating subsidies and trade barriers, and preserving support for science and technology, high-tech and traditional infrastructure, and research and development. With more workers, innovators, and entrepreneurs, we'll have a wealthier nation, we'll have different facts, and they will give us more revenue, a smaller structural gap, and therefore fewer painful choices to make. We can meet this challenge, and we can do so without intense pain, but we have limited time to do it. If we simply wait and let this structural deficit arrive, we court the fate of Greece, where financial markets are solving the structural gap at great cost in living standards and national power. But if we're bold enough to change facts, we'll create a fairer society, we'll offer older Americans more rewarding lives, we'll leave a government better able to earn public confidence and trust, and we'll build a 21st century America as able to lead the world as we were in the last century. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is John Irons. I'm currently the research director at the Economic Policy Institute, and I'm also a PhD economist. My remarks today are on behalf of EPI, the Century Foundation, as well as DEMOS. We have a partnership where we are working on some of these issues together. Given my limited time, I would note that a more elaborated version of my remarks have been submitted in written form, but I'm only going to hit a couple highlights here today. As Doug Elmendorf said this morning, there is no contradiction between pursuing job growth policies today and addressing the deficit in the future. Let me be even stronger. Given that the economy remains fragile and well below potential, job creation is needed today to ensure a strong economy and a solid tax base tomorrow. You can't reach reasonable budget targets without strong and rapid recovery. And you won't get a strong recovery, if you pursue austerity too early. To be concrete, unemployment, in my opinion, should reach 6% or lower and be on a downward trend before any fiscal contraction should be enacted. Forecasts show that we will not achieve this until 2013 or beyond. Any deficit reduction plan must account for the possibility that the recovery may be slower than anticipated, and any action that would harm the recovery should be explicitly delayed, perhaps through one or more triggers. On Social Security, as you know, is not a major driver of long-run deficits. Over the longer run, promised benefit levels would exceed dedicated revenues. However, this represents no more than 1/10 of the overall fiscal gap. Much and perhaps all of the Social Security gap can be closed through changes in the payroll tax that receive wide support in the public. For example, a recent poll conducted for the National Academy of Social Insurance found that 83% favor lifting the cap on income that is subject to the payroll tax. The America Speaks exercise that was just concluded showed even greater support for that option. Adjustments to benefit levels must be done in the context of overall retirement security. The recession has hammered private savings, and private pensions have been on a long-term decline. Social Security remains the most important component of retirement income for tens of millions of Americans, and benefit levels should be protected and even expanded in some cases. On the revenue side, revenue must be a major part of the solution, both in the short term and the long term. The cost of the 2001 and 2003 tax changes represent about 40% of the current policy deficit in 2015. These tax changes provided large tax reductions for high-income individuals, precisely the group that has seen the largest increases in incomes. Between 1979 and 2007, average pre-tax income for the top 1% of households has increased by 241%, while middle-income households have seen just a 19% increase. Allowing upper-income tax cuts to expire would go a long way towards achieving long-run sustainability. Now, we also need to look at other areas to raise revenue, looking at revenue from a carbon cap-and-trade regime or a carbon tax as a prime candidate. Looking at financial transactions tax or bank tax could also yield significant revenue. Additional revenue would allow the federal government to borrow less now and help avoid ballooning interest expenses that compound over time. On health care, increased costs for health care are the prime driver of long-term deficits. Health reform and cost control is obviously a huge issue. But let me just note that Medicare costs have risen more slowly than private sector insurance. Since 1970, private insurance costs have risen 48% faster than Medicare payments. Finally, let me note that public investment is essential. Recessions have long-term consequences, thus even short-term recovery spending can have enormous long-term benefits. Public investments will boost growth both in the short run and lead to greater economic capacity down the road. Deficit reduction cannot be done in a vacuum. We must consider key questions. What kind of country do we want to rebuild? What is the best way to preserve retirement security? How many resources should we devote as a nation to education, to scientific and human research, or to national defense? Deficit reduction without this context is purely a mathematical exercise, and the result will lack credibility and will likely result in a failure to make progress on this very important issue. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. Thanks.
First of all, I want to thank Maya for coming with very specific proposals. That is so helpful to us because we really need very specific proposals. Robert, your group has been very good at that as well, and I appreciate the contributions that you've made. You're right with respect to the budget proposal I've laid down. It would get to a deficit of 3% of GDP by 2015, which is the short-term goal of this commission. But much more daunting, and the place where I really want to rivet the point that you made, is I believe the intense focus of this group ought to be the longer term. That is, the real challenge are these long-term built-in imbalances that exist in our system. And I've always believed that is the place where this commission can make its greatest contribution. So thank you for making that point. Finally, I'm delighted that the representative of the Economic Policy Institute made the point of the difference between short-term, mid-term, and longer-term. Although I have always been a deficit hawk, I do not believe that this is the moment to impose the fiscal discipline that is needed long-term. In fact, it would be precisely the wrong medicine when the economy remains so weak, especially given the additional vulnerability created by the European debt crisis. So I think if this commission does its work, we'll be very careful about the short term, and I would go to 2013, maybe even 2014. But then we've got to pivot and put in place the structural changes that will prevent the explosion of debt that really does present an enormous threat to the long-term economic security of the country. So I think you're right on target with respect to warning us about the timing of what we do.
Thank you all very much. Very helpful, very much.